It wasn't an owl.
This happened when I was in college. As I've said in some of my previous stories, that was a period in my life where just a lot of creepy shit happened to me. I don't really know what I was doing to attract so many weirdos at that time of my life, but I probably should have been evaluating my life choices a little more closely. But anyway, on to the story. During college, I worked as a tutor at school, but on the weekends I would sometimes babysit for family friends. One of the kids was actually old enough that he didn't need a babysitter. We'll call him Chris. But he wasn't old enough to watch the younger kid. We'll call him Kevin. Thus my presence on the night that would prove to be honestly terrifying as fuck. I don't know, maybe you won't think it's as bad as I felt like it was. We'll see. Okay, so anyway, I was babysitting for this family one Saturday night. The parents didn't usually stay out too late, getting home at like 10 p.m. or earlier, even. Most nights when I babysat for their monthly date night. But this particular night was a special situation. I can't remember the circumstances of it now, but I mean I was 19. I could stay out past 10 p.m. They figured they'd be home by 1 a.m., and they said I was welcome to spend the night, but I'd already decided that would not be happening. That house honestly had a super weird vibe. It was kind of isolated, and they had all these old buildings on the property, a silo, some sheds, a gigantic barn, etc. Maybe I've watched too many horror movies, but all I could think was that there were so many places for people to hide in those buildings. Plus, the house was really old too, and those always freaked me out because, you know, ghosts. So I would not be spending the night, that was for sure. So I was babysitting the kids, and Kevin wanted me to go help him find something in the basement. He had all these costumes he used to like to dress up in. Once he scared the absolute shit out of me when he came up behind me in the dark, wearing an ultra-realistic soldier costume carrying a replica musket that I would have sworn was real, but turned out wasn't. I nearly lost my shit that night. The basement was the second creepiest part of the house. The creepiest was the attic, obviously, because attics are terrifying. So if he would have asked me to go up there, it would have been a hard no. It wasn't fully finished and was really big with like lots of corners and turns and hallways and shit with a bunch of different rooms. It was actually my first time going beyond the stairway, and I kept thinking that if I had been aware of just how scary this basement was, there was no way in hell I'd be babysitting in this house. But I of course didn't want to look like a wimp in front of a child, so I went with Kevin to his costume area, which was kind of deep into the basement because of course it was. As we were looking for the costume, well, Kevin was looking, I was questioning my life choices that had led me to that moment. We heard noises that can only be described as footstep-like upstairs. At first I just said it must be Chris, but then Chris was just suddenly in the doorway scaring the fucking hell out of me. Seriously, no idea where the fuck he came from, and he was like, "That's not me." I remember this moment vividly, the three of us standing near this closet filled with various costumes of varying creepiness in this tiny room, in a super sketch basement, listening to what we thought were footsteps upstairs. Well, this is how we die, I thought, weirdly kind of immediately at peace with it. But that only lasted a second before I thought, fuck that shit. And I looked around for a weapon. This is where watching too many horror movies actually came in handy. Of course there was nothing because I was in a child's playroom, and the rest of the basement had little within it apart from like a washer and dryer, which would make a poor weapon unless I could somehow push it onto someone, which seemed unlikely to happen in this particular situation. In the end, I settled on this random crowbar. For real, it was just lying on the floor and neither kid knew why. I cannot express how creepy this basement was, and I prepared to meet our fate while considering just how much of a risk I was willing to take to keep these kids safe. It was at this moment that I realized something. The dog wasn't barking. The family had this golden retriever named Lily, who would bark at fucking everything, and she wasn't barking, so I rationalized the sounds as just the noises an old house would make. Plus, I realized when we heard the noises, we weren't actually under the house itself based on the layout of the basement. We were under the porch. So even if there was someone, it wasn't anyone in the actual house. It could have been anyone, a delivery driver being the most likely explanation. I felt a lot better, but you bet your ass I kept that crowbar. Again, I say horror movies. They seriously prepared me for this type of situation. So the kids and I went upstairs, where we found Lily knocked the fuck out. Not like where someone knocked her out, she was just zonked. like she jolted awake when I touched her because she'd been sleeping that soundly. I actually thought she was dead at first because that was the way this night was going. Once upstairs, I went to the porch and very cautiously opened the door to look for a possible package. It was winter, so it got dark early, meaning it was feasible that a delivery driver would still be working after the sun went down. But naturally, there was no package. Of course there wasn't, right? I wouldn't be posting here if that's how this story ended. So anyway, by this point I was stressed the hell out, but the kids were over it. While they were playing video games and I was Googling the crime rates in this town, all of a sudden Lily perked up and started barking like a maniac. A second later, I heard a knock on the door. I just could not catch a fucking break this night. With my crowbar in hand, I walked to the door, and I could see through the frosted window in the door that someone was standing there. I couldn't make out their features, but someone was there. Since I'm not a total dumbass, I didn't open the door, but I did ask through the doorway who it was. The man on the other side of the door said they had a pizza delivery. You already know what I'm about to say. We did not order a pizza. This was before every kid had a cell phone, so the boys couldn't have ordered one, plus they had been totally dead to the world while they played video games. And if the parents had ordered pizza, they would have told me. So naturally, I again was prepared to fight for my life. I gripped the crowbar and I told the guy we hadn't ordered a pizza. I thought for sure he was going to insist and try to get me to open the door, but surprisingly, he didn't. He just said, "Oh, sorry, my mistake," and he turned and left. At this point, I had a lot of questions, as one would when facing a series of unusual events in a creepy house in the middle of nowhere. So as I saw the guy walk off the porch through the frosted window, I opened the door just slightly. I wanted to see this guy, in case I needed to identify him out of a lineup or something eventually. But by the time I opened the door, he was walking away, so I only saw his back. But I immediately noticed two strange things. I didn't see a pizza in his hands, and I didn't see his car. The latter I could rationalize because he might have parked on the street, which would have been strange since they had a large horseshoe-shaped driveway, but maybe. But there was no pizza. I guess technically it might have just been blocked from view, but I doubted it very much. I almost called him out on this too in a burst of ill-timed bravery, but then I realized that if I did, he would know the jig was up and would have nothing to lose. So I just closed and locked the door. Later that night, Lily was again knocked out, and the kids were upstairs in bed. I didn't think I'd fall asleep. I honest to God was sitting there with the crowbar in my hands on high alert, like I was about to be in a fight for my life. In hindsight, maybe it was a bit of an overreaction, but I wasn't going to be one of those idiots who dies because they underestimated a threat level. I might as well have suggested the kids and I split up, which of course I realized in that moment that was essentially what had happened. They wouldn't have been much help to me anyway. Well, actually, Chris might have because he was 14, as tall as I was, and could break a board with his fist. Maybe I should have kept him around. Anyway, eventually, I did fall asleep for like a half hour, and I was awoken to the sound of an owl. I'm a really light sleeper, so either the owl hooting woke me up or else it was just a coincidence, but I heard the owl when I woke up. Only, it didn't sound quite right. It sounded almost like an owl, but something was off about it. As I look back on this now, what I did next was extraordinarily foolish given the events that had transpired that night. But I think my tired brain wasn't working fast enough. That's the real killer in horror movies. Exhaustion. In my fatigued state, I decided to investigate. I went to the door and listened. The owl was still hooting, but it still sounded weird. I couldn't figure out why it sounded so off, and this is when I did another stupid thing. I opened the door. With the door open, I could hear the owl a little better, and I looked into the darkness, shining the light on my phone around. And given that this was early 2007, the light left a lot to be desired. Suddenly, I heard the owl again, and I honest to God gasped because this was when it all came together. The hooting didn't sound like an actual owl. It sounded someone, a human, imitating an owl. For real. Even recalling it now for this story is giving me literal chills. Maybe it doesn't sound like a lot, but it was one of the truly terrifying experiences in my life, the moment where I realized this. My heart was about to fucking pound. right out of my chest, and I still had the beam of light from my phone pointed into the darkness. And that was when I saw it reflected off of a set of eyes that were at the level a human's would be. And remember, this was 2007, so that light was total shit, which means the owner of said eyes was uncomfortably close, though it was so dark outside I couldn't make out anyone. I wasn't tired anymore, so I came to my senses, locked that fucking door, barricaded it with a chair, and retreated into the living room after checking all of the downstairs windows again. I also grabbed a big-ass knife from the kitchen, like a Michael Myers-style knife, because at this point I legitimately thought I might need it. I really contemplated calling the police, but what was I going to tell them? That something outside was making owl noises and had eyes? They'd be like, "That's a fucking owl, you idiot," and then probably hang up on me. So I just sat on the couch again, this time clutching the knife and crowbar both. And I tried not to think about all the horror stories I had read or seen, especially the ones involving well-meaning babysitters meeting gruesome ends. But I was not successful, and I did not fall asleep again. Around midnight, the couple came home. I had texted them to kind of warn them without sounding like I had completely lost any shred of cool I had left, which would have been an accurate way to read my texts. I just said that I thought I had heard someone outside, so be careful when they got home. They were totally unbothered because they lived in some bizarro world where bad things didn't ever happen to good people. They walked in nonchalantly while I put the knife away before they saw me clinging to it, like a shipwreck victim clings to any piece of floating debris they can find. And this was when they told me that they thought they had heard someone outside a few nights ago, because of course this wasn't something you would tell your babysitter beforehand. I mean, why would I need to know that? So I took my very well-earned, I swear to Jesus, money, ran to my car, and got the fuck out of there. Once I got home, I realized I still had the crowbar, and I won't lie to you, I never brought it back. I mean, because of their critical omission of information, I lived what was very nearly an actual nightmare, so I fucking earned that crowbar too. This was the end of my babysitting career. Only one other time did I babysit for them, and that was during a legit medical emergency one of the parents was having. Everything turned out fine in the end, luckily. I mean, I couldn't well turn them down when they called me in desperation. And nothing weird happened that night, thank fuck, because I don't think I would have the mental capacity to deal with this shit again. But you know, even all these years later, I know one thing with absolute certainty. That was not an owl.